Welcome to ArtTalk, everyone, presented by Phillips Mill Community Association. I'm your host, Laura Womack, and with me is ArtTalk producer, Jen McHugh.
Hello, everyone.
They are the earliest trainers of tomorrow's artists, and now they have to do their job remotely, often through Zoom. They are art teachers. John Rodgers is a sculptor who teaches at Upper Dublin High School in Fort Washington, and although he runs classes from beginner to advanced levels at a large public school, he still finds time to do his own art. He has a 10-year unbroken acceptance rate into Phillips Mill, which is an impressive run. This year, he won the Phillips Mill Community Association Sculpture Award in memory of William Billy Beaumont. He trained at Tyler School of Art, University of Pennsylvania, and Cornell University. Amanda Penecale is a painter and photographer who teaches at Ranney School, a small college prep in Monmouth County, New Jersey. She trained at Rhode Island School of Design and Illustration. Amanda also won an award in this year's Phillips Mill show. She won the award for first-time exhibitor in memory of Russell P. Gilsdorf, given by Pat and Bruce Hamilton. We welcome you to Art Talk, and we hope you'll join us with your comments and questions by typing into the Q&A. Jen and I will work your questions into the conversation as we go along. Amanda and John, welcome, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
John, let's start with you. Did you realize that you'd been in every Phillips Mill show for the last 10 years?
No, you asked me a question about that the other day, and I actually had to go back and look at my resume. And then I realized it had been a pretty good stretch. I've been very fortunate to have been involved with such a high caliber show for so many years. Starting back in, trying to think what it was, but 17 shows altogether.
Oh, that's pretty impressive. So we have Amanda, who's a prize winner, her first time in, and John Rodgers, who is an experienced and storied sculptor. I have to say, 10 years in a row. I think there are a lot of artists who are fantastic artists who don't get in every year, so that's a pretty good run. Let's start, John, with your sculpture for this year that won the award. It's called COVID Put Us in a Tailspin, and I know Jen is going to put that up for us to look at. Tell us how this piece came about.
It started actually back in March when we were sent home and we were no longer able to teach in the buildings. And I had started with a piece of birch plywood, and it had a curve to it, and I cut several pieces of that sheet, stacked them, and glued them together, which is the main part of that sculpture, which is that sort of magenta type color. And as I had it on my workbench and started to look at it from different angles, I decided that COVID at that time, was really throwing our daily lives off. It was something totally unexpected. When I heard that we were going to be out for 2 weeks, I didn't realize that the severity of it had been what it was, and then obviously it turned out to be something greater than that. So I decided that I wanted this piece to be off center. The base of it is made out of walnut, and then I have a lot of stainless steel in my shop, a lot of different rings, so I started to put them around the sculpture, and I got this sense of whirling and spinning. Not kinetic, but the inference of movement that way, and then decided to use dye and wood stain to make it look like the color that we often see when they refer to imagery from COVID. And then the top piece is triangular, again, looking at kind of the symbolism of the COVID germ itself. And then the very center of it, which is black, is a piece of coal that I got that had washed up on the beach. And I had played with that piece years ago and found that you could actually polish it to a very high shine. So I wanted that in there, and then it's hard to see in the image, but I used a grinder and had that set up so that it was basically shooting kind of rays out from that center part. And I wanted it to be kind of a threatening piece in a way, for that top section, as if anybody could be affected by it. So.
We were curious whether we would receive much COVID art. We had a few submissions, but not a lot. But I think now, I wonder if next year we'll have even more, because there's just, if you were working on this in March, it's obviously been a long road since then.
Yeah, it was sort of my way of dealing with COVID. I don't always do thematic pieces, but this one just sort of became something that I retreated to in my shop when I was thinking of ways to kind of work my feelings and kind of deal with the whole crisis in a three-dimensional manner.
Jen, let's look at golden rule. So I'm interested, looking at your art, John. I keep seeing arcing forms, and I'm wondering if that has a special meaning for you, is a shape that you're drawn to. So we see it in golden rule, and we'll look. I want to give you a chance to talk about that, but it's also in the next piece, for echo.
Yeah, that's a good observation with a trait that I seem to be running back and forth. And a lot of my work consists of found object pieces, as well as pieces that are manipulated from original, either purchased or found forms that are manufactured. And this one started from a large bronze ring that I had gotten at a scrapyard. And I decided that that would be sort of the way the whole piece would start, with this sort of spine of bronze that I then connected very thin pieces of Brazilian cherry to laminate it, so it basically hugged up against that form. And then started to cut some smaller pieces, some smaller arcs. So they're all part of the same radius, but I didn't want them to look like they were. So I connect them with a technique called tap and die. So there's holes with threads holding these pieces together in stainless steel hardware. And then the top piece is actually two turned pieces. You can see one in the picture, and there's another one facing the opposite side, made out of Brazilian cherry and then purple heart. And the bottom is the base of choke cherry. So I often in my shop have sections of pike that are already in that shape, Laura, that kind of lends itself to a lot of curvature in my work. I also did a lot of work way on in my earlier part of my career with a lot of straight edge pieces. I thought I wanted to be an architect at one point. And then math kind of got in the way. So I've kind of resisted doing a lot of straight edge pieces since I left doing all steel sculpture and started to work with wood and wood joined up with metal.
Let's take a look at, sorry, Amanda? Oh, sorry. Let's take a look at For Echo, please. No.
This was a piece in Phillips Mill show 2 years back, I believe. And this one started more from the ground up. So very often I start with a core piece, and then the base is something I deal with toward the end. That is a piece of red oak that washed up on the beach after Hurricane Sandy that started the base. And then from there, I found a piece of ash that I liked. That it's hard to see in the imagery there, but there are a lot of wormholes in there. And then I torched it on purpose to raise the grain, and then finished it with a black dye finish. And then there's one of those stainless steel sections of tubing you can see is the main core. So I wanted to integrate those two pieces and then create some inference of movement again. So the ball at the top, I actually got on eBay. It's part of a float ball for a tank. And then you can see some of the arcs with wood incorporated, and then a bronze curl in the very front of it. So I find it a challenge and a way of avoiding having the metal become too cold by introducing the different characters that are found in the wood. And I always finish the wood, if it's solid wood, with a clear coat to allow the natural grain to come through. With the COVID piece, it was plywood, so I stained it, but usually I just put a clear coat on them.
It has a lovely feathering at the top there. And Sorry, I think there's a little bit of an echo back, so that's why I got distracted. Sorry about that. There's a lovely feathering at the top there, John, but your work also has these very strong elements of metal and wood, which we don't think of as being in the same works. And I know that's an important aspect of your work for you.
Yeah, I started off working with steel. My freshman year of college, I went to Skidmore College for 2 years, and I had a wonderful professor named John Cunningham. And when I took my first sculpture class and learned how to weld with different welding techniques, I was pretty much hooked from that point on, and knew that I was going to work with metal as my main media. And after doing that for a number of years and doing those straight edge pieces that I've referred to, I found myself going to grad school and trying to figure out what my focus was going to be for those years. And it became a focus where I had done some small furniture making previous to that enrollment and my metal sculpture, and they were always two separate camps. So I decided that when I got to Penn, that I was going to try and figure out a way to make the two go together in a natural way, not looking like they were slammed together, but integrated with one another. And that has pretty much been my focus ever since.
So a lot of physicality, it seems to me, to creating sculpture.
Yes, exactly. And it's a workout sometimes, and I work in my driveway primarily in the summer when I'm on my teacher's vacation, and I'm sure the neighbors wonder what I'm doing sometimes when I'm sending up clouds of dust and sweating like crazy if it's a typical Philadelphia day at 90-degree weather. But I like that tactile work. I love drawing as well, but the tactile work is something I've always been more drawn to.
That's great. Thank you, John.
You're quite welcome.
Thank you. If we, I just want to remind people to send in their questions or comments on the Q&A. And it looks like Amanda, did I read you wrong? Did you have something you wanted to add?
I wanted to ask John, as a young artist growing up, did you lean towards three-dimensional projects in your art classes at school, or maybe clay? I mean, you know, you don't have an 8-year-old necessarily doing metal and steel and wood. I was just curious if that was something you knew like early on as an artist.
No, that's a great question. I loved to do drawing when I was younger. We would get Encyclopedia Britannicas, and I would draw on the covers, not read the interior of it, but draw inside. And my grandmother, my mother's mother, was a fashion illustrator. Went to Moore College of Art when it was the Women's College of Art during the Depression. So I get a lot of my art genes from that side of the family in particular. But I spent my high school years mostly doing drawing and painting. I did do some sculpture with soapstone and wood, but it was really not until I started to work with metal that it really clicked that was going to be something that I would be going forward with for quite a while. But that's a great question.
Thanks.
Amanda, let's take a look at a little bit of your work. You're a first-time exhibitor at Phillips Mill, but you actually have a long history with us, and I think that your first experience at Phillips Mill had a profound effect on your career, if I'm not mistaken. While Jen pulls up your piece from this year's show, do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, yeah. I've always been an artist or thought of myself as an artist since I was a child, and knew that I was going to go off and study art in some format. And the summer before I went to RISD, I had an internship at the Michener in Doylestown, and I was a teaching intern. Funny enough, one of the other interns became a lifelong friend from that program, because she ended up, I met her again at Brown. So it was so funny that from this area we both went in that sort of route. But yeah, I was teaching and helping and assisting with classes and really loving working with the younger students. And I had one part of the summer where I was at Phillips Mill with painter Linda Gunst. And she is remarkable and does all sorts of kinds of paintings, focusing a lot on nature. And I just thought she was wonderful. And I got to basically assist her in teaching the class at the mill. So here I was, right before going into college, working with 7 to 14-year-olds. And to stand there with other young artists and see the way that I felt and the way that they felt and how we were both very similar, but be able to kind of foster that joy in them really helped me sort of steer my path as I moved on um, through college and beyond. So every summer I've taught somewhere in some capacity since that summer really. But yeah, I just summer art camps are really my favorite time of year. So.
That's a wonderful story. Thanks for sharing that with us. Let's look at your work. It's Up Cliffs and Fox, and you talk about how you feel like the light in our area has a very special quality. Talk about that and how that relates to your work here.
Yeah, well, like John, we had a little more time with the stay-at-home order early in the spring, and I started finding even greater joy than I usually do in my daily walks to get mail, and then also walks around the property. So we're up in Ottsville, and there's beautiful cliffs and trees and natural flowers and wildflowers everywhere. And I kept thinking I'm going to make a painting of the lake coming around the cliffs. So after a matter of walks, I found my favorite spot. There's like a section where the cliff digs deep and the water drips down from the cracks. And that's where a lot of wildflowers like to grow. And I just love the way that the shadows lay within inside the structures. And it just seems like a really special part of this area. So I try to include bold shadow work in majority of the pieces.
Right. So you've said that Van Gogh was one of your influences, and I'm thinking here, looking at this piece, that it's the strong brush strokes that have come out from that influence.
Maybe the strong brushwork, but also a lack, like a determination to show the color bold. I think earlier on in my painting career, I took a lot of fluid, where I was mixing colors together on the canvas a lot more. And in my more current work, I'm doing a lot more painting on the palette and then applying it almost the way you would with the oil pastel. And I thought, just for the sake of conversation, I hope you see this, but I have some studies I've been doing for like my next painting, and they're oil pastels, but I feel like they relate to my paintings in a way, because you can kind of see how I'm really drawn by bold colors. So obviously, our works in progress and little studies, but it's sort of about the light and the boldness.
The color. Jen, let's look at, I didn't write the name of it, but the trees picture.
The autumn.
Trees, yeah. And so I think there we definitely, again, we're dealing with some very strong color.
Oh yeah, my friends joke about that I get like hyped on a color, and they're 100% right. Ever since I was a little kid, I mean, I get an orange sweater, making art about orange things. But in the yellow season, I was definitely feeling that. These are the same cliffs actually as that first piece, just in a different season. Loving finding the highlights and shadows. That one's from Overmeyer's Mill. I'm trying to remember the name of that bridge. I feel like folks might know that area better by the bridge name. But
And then let's look at the farm buildings painting. You were talking about you're interested in shadow, and I think this is a lot of this picture is consumed with shadow.
yeah, in this image that I made, this was an oil painting, and I was interested in how the shadow feels like it almost lays like a blanket. And that's what the painting was about, not only just the color, but how by painting the shadow a certain way, you could kind of feel the shadow's presence. Even when I do photography, I'm often looking for contrast and shadow, like that feel, that weight of the shadow in a space.
Right, that's great. So we didn't preview this, Amanda, but I've asked Jen if it's possible for her to pull up your website where the photography is, because I know that in addition to being a painter, you're a photographer. So I just, while she's pulling that up, if that's possible, Jen.
see that those couple photos that if that's easier, the ones from this recent. Either way.
Well, I was going to say, while they're being brought up, I had a question for Amanda too.
There you go.
Thanks, John.
So Amanda, you shared your oil painting the other day, and we had our preview meet. And I love that one with the shadow with the barn. But do you find now that you're working with acrylics is freeing? You have a lot of excitement when you talk about working with the acrylics. I'm wondering if you miss blending colors like you did as much when you did the oil paint.
No, I also use watercolors, so I'm not really static to one medium, but it's true, it's so different. Some of the things that you find that are joyous about the oil paint is that you can really get a beautiful blend and a transition, real seamless, and it's possible in acrylic. It's just that's not the way that I use acrylic. So the thing that makes acrylic great, I felt freed up. I know we mentioned this when we met the first time, is that I saw a documentary on current works by David Hockney, and he was talking about how he uses acrylic because it dries faster and he can move through the forest and set up his easels, and it just works better for his purposes. And I felt like, man, if a hero of mine like David Hockney is able to use acrylic, then so can I. That's really when I transitioned. I think that was probably this past winter, and I really started thinking, I don't need to have all the turpentines and the things. It's a certain scent to oil painting, and also a dry time, right? So acrylics, I can make a painting and I can sell it to someone, in a day or two, as opposed to having to wait for it to dry. And obviously, everything's have their advantages and disadvantages. So there's still some real beauty to oil painting, and when I have a chance, I'll definitely do it.
So, Jen, we have we had a little flash before we had a diversion in our conversation of, I think, a photograph that I'm delighted to see because it looks quite a bit like your farm building painting.
I just actually took this yesterday, the day before. So I told you I had been exploring in Sandy Hook, and this was in the barracks area, over near in the park, and it really feels like that painting to me. And it was interesting because the moment I saw it, I was with my brother, and he's like, "Why are you getting me so excited?" I was like, "Oh, this is like another version of something I know really well." So I was excited about it, and I love the way that the light hits the front of the structure and then the shadow goes behind it, but then also the house is in the distance.
Oh, it's wonderful. It's a wonderful photograph, and it has a certain sort of haunting quality with that repetition of the built space. So, Amanda, we are having a little bit of an audio problem. I don't know if there's something you can do about that, but if you want to take a quick look into that, we can hear you, so we can go forward. But maybe if you want to look into that, we have a question for John. Let's see. Do you draw out your concept originally before starting the sculpture, or do you let the found objects drive the creativity? And your work is amazing.
Well, thank you, Jim. I usually do start with sketches, just because I want to have a little bit of a direction, and then I tweak things a whole lot once I'm in the shop. I'll start with that drawing and translate it into three-dimensional materials. But then I'll take other pieces of metal in the shop and I'll clamp them to the main body of the sculpture so I can get a read on it, stand back and walk around it. And then if I like the way it fits, that's when I start to weld it together. But I do refer to and rely a lot on how it looks from a distance and using those clamps to just temporarily hold things in place. But I do start off with sketches quite often because I just feel like that's a good way for me to start to mentally wrap my head around the idea of the project and where it's going to head. And quite often I will work on sketches before the summer when I get time to really get into the shop uninterrupted for a couple months worth of time. So I sort of plan in advance and don't want to waste that time once I am able to start fabricating things.
Oh, Amanda, I think is maybe going to rejoin us. So for the audio, I hope that's what's going on. But John, you were talking about COVID. Your piece for the show this year, for the Phillips Mill show this year, was inspired by COVID and the difficulty, just sort of the shock I think that we all felt, the disorientation we all felt in dealing with that. And now for both of you, you're having to deal with this ongoing, now you're teaching ongoing, and I think it's going to be through the end of the school year at least that we're under these circumstances. So both of you, Amanda's back now, welcome back. You're on mute, Amanda, so hopefully we've got that sorted out. How are you both? What's happening in your classrooms now? I think art is a little bit different than teaching other subjects. What's happening in your classrooms now as you're coping with COVID? Are students back?
They are. It's been a huge challenge. They were all virtual. Then we went to hybrid. Then we went back to virtual, and now we're hybrid again. But interestingly enough, even though we've been hybrid for the last 2 weeks, the numbers of students has dropped off significantly. A lot of families don't feel comfortable sending their kids to school, which I totally understand and respect. From a teaching standpoint, I'm trying as much as possible to still have my students get a three-dimensional experience. They do some drawing, basically preparing for projects like I do, like Jim asked about. But I have been putting together kits. The first kit that the kids got was a bag of tools that luckily I had enough of that they could keep at home, and then a block of clay, and then I roll out videos on what they're supposed to do for each project. And then they finish the first project, bring it back, get another piece of clay for their second one, and then I fire the first one while they're working on the second, kind of rotate things through. But it's very disjointed. I think the biggest frustration I have is in not being able to interact with the students. That was why I got into this field in the first place, and to relate to them through the internet is a challenge, and it's a challenge to see their work as well, because they're holding their Chromebooks and their laptops and trying to maneuver them. The lighting's not always good in their kitchen or their bedroom or their basement, wherever they're making their work. And then there's the challenge of technology in their houses when one or both parents are working from home and siblings are working from home. Kids drop out occasionally, then they come back and audio goes out. So it's been tough. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. But I'm trying to give them as much of a 3D experience as possible. So it's extra work for me, but I don't mind, because I want them to enjoy the class and quite honestly just have some time away from the computer and the screen, which I think they appreciate as well.
I think that's marvelous. How about you, Amanda? How are your subject? John is teaching sculpture. You're teaching painting and also photography. How is that? It's a little bit of a different experience physically.
So I am doing I have a little bit easier for my photography classes. So I'm not going to lie, as much as they're not getting in the dark room, for digital photography, I can take over their screens and I can show Photoshop techniques or Lightroom, and then they can take over my screen and show me what they're working on, right? So that works really well. And I've actually learned some techniques that I might continue to use in critiques through screens, right? So that's a bonus. But my foundations of art classes are, drawing, painting, a little bit of sculpture. So I was fortunate to come into a department with folks who had developed a system of boxes. So they had these shoe boxes filled with all the materials for the students that they came up with over the summer. So this is my first year at Rani, I came into it, and it actually worked really great, and we're thinking about continuing on with it, not just during pandemic. So everyone has their own, ruler, scissors, a little sketchbook, just the basic supply. Now, that might not be possible at a much larger program, It's something that we're able to do, and I acknowledge that, but it's been very successful in my point of view. And the other thing that's great about it is even when they're on campus, they bring their boxes with them, and then I don't have to hand out all the supplies. So it helps the teacher out a bit in the organizational sense, like get out your micron drawing marker and your sketchbook, and now you need your ruler, and they already have them. So that was an unexpected sort of bonus of this sort of learning curve we've been in this year. I mean, I think obviously everyone is kind of going through things in a different way throughout this whole process of what we're dealing with emotionally and with health. So I feel just blessed that I get to still talk about the things and work with the kids, even if it's kind of odd. Like John, I don't know about you. I was thinking some of the sculpture stuff, but I have like, we were learning perspective drawing with my 9th graders, and I'm like, okay, so do you see the boxes? So now we're gonna race here. And they're like, I'm like, hold your sketchbook up, let me see it, you know, and they're holding it up, and I'm like, no, your other left, no, parallel, like railroad tracks, you know. So you find yourself learning to talk about art in new and interesting ways. Some of my other art teacher friends have mentioned, like, I would have never thought to talk about it like this, but you kind of have to try again, just try again. How do you explain something if you can't go over their desk and lean over and say, oh, look, shift it like this? So I can imagine with sculpture, that's 3 dimensions of challenge, but it's definitely been different. And I've had students on campus the whole time at some capacity. We've had a couple weeks here and there that we were all at home, virtual, but for the most part, our school had it be sort of a case by case. The family can do a hybrid. So, you know, I've had as little as 1 student in a class sometimes to half a room other times. And I think, you know, everybody's just getting through. They seem to be happy to be in art either which way. So I think I feel thankful that I get to do something that most of my students like. Can't say all of them, but most of them like their art class.
Man, it sounds like you've learned some things and learned some new tools or techniques that just in coping with COVID, which is wonderful. I mean, we all are stretching. John, have you had any of that experience, or is it just been unmitigated challenge?
There have been some highlights. I was just going to add that I have a pile of Post-its on my desk at school, and I'm constantly doing little drawings to show the students, to make suggestions on what they might do to their sculpture to make it stronger or structurally a little bit more sound. So it is great that they enjoy doing their art, and that they also find it a nice break from the screen, as I talked about a few minutes ago. I've learned a lot in terms of technology, because I've been filming a lot of my videos that I've uploaded into Google, so that they can look at them at any time if they want a refresher, or if they were absent from a class. But you know, by and large, they're working hard, and the projects I think that I've seen so far have been very well done. I'm just not at the same volume that I would normally have for post-Thanksgiving. I think the projects have probably been close to 50% of what we normally accomplish. So, and part of that's the logistics of getting work picked up and dropped off, because my freshmen in particular have to rely on either older siblings or parents in order to get to school and pick things up. So
We've been so worried about students, you know, what they're missing out on this year socially and academically, as you know, the challenge of COVID has kept kids out of school. And do you feel, like you said, that you don't have the volume of assignments, John? Do you both feel that, you know, how far behind are students falling in their art education due to this COVID environment, in art specifically?
in my area, I'm fine now in terms of they're getting what I want them to get, which is the beginning of the year, I give them clay. And in January, we normally shift to woodworking and mixed media, which relies on working with equipment in my room. For my intro students, that means using a drill press and sanders and some basic equipment. all the way up to my honors class, they're using table saws and lathes and heavy duty equipment. So come January, I'm going to have to do a bit of a tap dance to try and figure out how I'm going to change my curriculum, because I usually go through several different medias in order to give them a full range of experience. I'm fortunate enough to have 2 kilns and woodworking equipment. And we even work with plexiglass and non-ferrous metals as well. So I'm hoping that they can get a similar experience by the end of the year, even considering that the volume of projects will be down. But I do have some thinking I'm going to have to do it if we're out of the building at that point.
So we were able to get permission to show some of the students' art, which I think is really exciting. And that I haven't seen it yet because we were waiting for the permission before we shared it. But Amanda, I think you've got your pictures in, and I saw a couple of images go by, and it actually looks really exciting. Can we see some of that, Jen? And
Yeah, so I show a variety of ranges of age and different materials. This is a good one because it actually talks about finding new ways to teach something. So my department chair, Kate, and I, she and I both teach foundations of art, and we were like, okay, well, we have to do a sculpture project for our students. What are we going to do? They're at home. So this project was something the 2 of us developed together, and we were thinking, what materials are in the box? What can we make? And they made these sculptures out of watercolor paper that they already had, and their watercolors and their scissors, right? And it's a slotted sculpture, so it doesn't require any sort of glue or fastening. And it's a really fun project that I hadn't taught before. Probably I would have done some sort of clay project in the classroom, like some sort of a mosaic tile or relief tile, or maybe even a coil pot or something, because they're my intro students. But this came out really cool. So this actually was emailed to me yesterday by a student who just finished her project. It was her final for her foundations class. And I'm really blown away with what they're able to come up with on their own, and with materials they had that, have just been given new life. So
it's fabulous. It's fabulous. Do you mind if I ask John as a sculptor? What do you think, John? It's pretty great, I would say.
Oh, I think it's great. Yeah, it definitely ties in with the artist's style very well.
Well, I will let the student know.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the next one, Amanda? What do we have, Jen?
What did you put in, Jen? So I've taught almost every age group. So I threw in a couple just to show different images. This is a traditional portrait now of a geometric object. Normally they'd each have a set of objects in front of them, and then we'd sit around them in like a studio setting. So what was a little bit different this year is I set the objects in one room over by itself, and then they went over and they photographed the object, and then they came back to their sort of separated distance seats, and they had to work from their photograph, which obviously is like changing what we're perceiving in our work, right? So you're not looking at something from life and in the round, but they're still getting to learn about the shadow and the placement of shadows. And I included this picture specifically because I loved how the way we get work is different now, right? So instead of a pile of paintings that you have, you're getting the photo from the student. So this one sort of almost has this like Pinteresty vibe to it, where it has the picture and then the studio space a little behind it. So some pictures are better than others in terms of reflecting the student's project. So then I might have to email back and say, hey, I think your project's pretty good, but your photo's pretty terrible. Do you think you could try again? Because it's hard if they're new to this, the shadow of the phone or the glare from the screen or things like that. So it really gets in the way of the piece. But
doing art from photographs is we could do several shows on that, I think. So that's another element that maybe was not part of your curriculum, Amanda, but now is. Let's see one more, Amanda, and if there's a title you can tell Jen, then we'll take a look at some of John's works.
Oh, this is one that also was just finishing up, but teaching linear perspective through the screen was a bit of a interesting process. You know, here's students who don't understand or haven't really come across that idea. So talking about how it was developed and how we work on it. But I think this student did a great job. And once again, I didn't want to crop the picture because when you crop it, then some of the perspective looks wacky. So I figured you could just see it the way she had it on her table. But I had them draw their room that they wish they were in, and then they had a space outside of the room and that they would like to be like exploring. And based on the work of Matisse and the idea of his like open window paintings and that idea of domestic life and imagery, like the fauves, bold colors. So normally we might have used tempera for this project or oil pastel, but they had their color pencils and their watercolors. So that's what they used for this year. But I still think they
Did a
came out.
great job. They got the reflection of the tree in the mirror, and I mean, it's a cozy room. It's a really, and there's a lot going on in this picture.
I will let her know.
Thank you, Amanda. Okay, let's see some of John's students' works. Wow.
So this is an honor student who graduated a couple years back. Um, and Amanda, you just mentioned mosaic. She wanted to treat the top of this table like a wood mosaic. So she glued together several pieces of red oak, and then we thinned them down on the planer so that they were only about maybe 3/8 of an inch thick. And then she drew this design on the wood, cut each piece out that you see so that she could then use a combination of dyes and stains to color each one differently. But then when you put it back together again, all the grain ran consistently through the top of the table. And then we used resin to fill in the spaces between the different cuts. So that's where the black lines came in. And then she decided to make a shelf to go down below that so that she could take it and put it in her dorm or her apartment at some point. And then wanted a strong black border around the outside to sort of frame it and then tie that in with the legs as well.
Awesome.
Really an impressive work. This looks like a fully realized, mature artist. Would you not agree, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, it's beautiful, not to mention the fact that it's, you know, physical wood objects. Uh, yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there. It's beautiful.
All right.
Thank you. And I'm very fortunate that in this young lady's case, I had her for 4 years straight. So I actually skipped her over the intro level into the intermediate level, and it was great to work with her for so many years. But I love the fact, this is sort of an aside, that I get to know the students so well after so many years and see their growth, and she grew fantastically.
No, I can see. I would be proud of this student as well, John.
Yeah, she's great.
Another.
Another student also from honors that I had for 4 years. Love working with clay and wood, and wanted to make a piece specifically for a second home that they had on the Chesapeake Bay. And so that's where the fish theme came in. So that's a mosaic on the top. And then she collected all sorts of driftwood that washed up on the eastern shore. And we made the legs sturdy enough to hold the tabletop first. And then she adorned the outside of it with these different pieces of driftwood to kind of tie in with the theme of the fish, but also she wanted specifically to go into that home at a future date where you could even see the driftwood from their living room, I think. So
These are really remarkable. I mean, all of these students are really impressive, and they're at different stages, but wow, what incredible work. I can see why you both enjoy your jobs.
oh yeah, I'm very fortunate.
Yes, same.
I'm very lucky.
Ah,
This was sort of a collaborative project. So this was an honor student as well. She was also taking anatomy and physiology with one of my colleagues, and asked if she could do a project that related to anatomy because she had to do a quarter-long project for my colleague, but she wanted to get much more involved than the quarter-long projects that were required for anatomy. And so she asked permission to do something that was fairly elaborate, and I talked to my colleague, and we both agreed that she had the talent to pull off something that would be much more involved than what was required for anatomy, but would satisfy what was required for me. So this is a technique called in Tarsa, where she drew everything out on oak tag, cut the oak tag out, traced it onto the wood, and then as each piece was done being cut out, she rounded the edges over a little bit, which you can see more in the neck and the shoulder blade area. Um, so that way each piece had its own kind of character because it was rounded over and looked nicer than just having everything kind of be flat and joined up with tight edges. So that piece is probably 3.5 feet tall altogether. And like my pieces, all the wood you're seeing there came from our room. We're fortunate enough that we get wood donations periodically from local furniture makers. And that's just clear coating on top of all the different species of wood that she chose. And I also have some pieces that are left over that are exotic woods from my sculptures that are too small for me to use. So I bring them in, let the students have them to use as well.
Cool.
Well, that's just marvelous. Really impressive work. Does it stand up, or how is it displayed?
That one's a wall relief. So we have to have a fairly heavy hook to hold that one up. But yeah, so the kids do a combination of in the round pieces as well as reliefs. But she knew that she had enough to deal with just doing the back that would be a wall piece from the beginning.
Well, that's lovely. Thank you both, and thank you to your schools and your students for sharing their work with us. That is a real treat because we don't know what they're doing, what they're capable of. So it's nice to know what we're talking about and how much they're contributing, what their futures look like. I mean, you have some people there who are going to go on and become artists, it seems like. And that's something we talked about before too, is, how do you engage students who are not already interested in the arts? That's a perennial that has nothing to do with COVID.
Right, for sure. And I think for me, I chose to share my Foundations of Art class work, which is their sort of first level high school work. And the reason I did that for myself is I think it's interesting to show like a starting place, but also my upper level classes are photography. And I felt really weird about sharing photography work. I felt like it was so highly personal. A lot of the times, well, obviously I wasn't going to show pictures of the students, and a lot of them do portraiture. And then a lot of them are showing the insides of their homes, their neighborhoods, their direct surroundings. So I was thinking about that, and I wanted to ask you, John, obviously with photography or even a drawing or a painting, a lot of students show themselves. Is there any sort of crossover in sculpture projects where you find you have like more direct representation of a student, or you might come across that, or is your stuff more abstracted in a way that that's not a concern?
I think that's a great question. I think, Amanda, what happens is it depends on the project. So through the years, I've done a Joseph Cornell project where they make their own shadow boxes. They get to use the table saw and actually make the framed box and put shelves in. And for a number of years, it had to be a self-portrait shadow box. So they could break it down into different compartments, and one would be about family, one might be about their interests, one might be about their friends. And so that was always very telling to see what they would pick to go in there. They had found objects that they could include, but they also had to do some 2- and 3-dimensional work in addition to building the box. And I deviated from it a couple years because I found some of the students really didn't want it to be about themselves. They weren't comfortable going in that direction. So I let them choose somebody who was inspirational to them, a musician that they may have liked, another artist. But that project in particular brought out a lot of their own personalities.
That makes sense. I love Joseph Cornell's work. The Cornell box is really cool.
Jim, we have a question from Ansi Stefano about our, that relates to our upcoming youth art show. As you know, we've got the youth art show coming up. The exact dates are undetermined. We're adjusting to COVID, but our youth art program head is working on that now, working with teachers, and we're really excited about that. Jen, if you can share the question from Ansi Stefano with us. Yeah, there we go.
Sure. Ansi said, I wonder if any of your students have entered our youth art show.
We have. Upper Dublin's entered the last couple of years. I think I found out about it through being in the adult show. And it's a great show. We're always very impressed with the work. And I am one of 4 art teachers in our school. So we have somebody that does all photography, somebody who does all painting and drawing, somebody who does printmaking and painting and drawing. So we've been fortunate enough to enter in each of the different categories coming from each of our own strengths, so to speak. And it's a great show. It includes both private and public school work for those folks that are not familiar with the show, but very high caliber work. And we love the opportunity and honor to be involved with that as well.
Amanda, is Rani in the area for that? Have you participated in the past?
So this is my, I have not, and I apologize that I haven't. Now I'm feeling bad. But at this time as exhibitor in this year's show, I feel like John, I'm only just really fully finding out all the things. But I think my current job at Rani is a little too far geographically. I'd have to check. I know my current home where I am right this minute and my permanent address at the moment is okay, but my school itself, I think we're a little too far over towards the ocean. So, but I will check. I will double check.
Yeah, check in. And Amanda, you and I had talked previously about doing some more work with students in your off season from the classroom. So hopefully we'll be able to work on that.
Yeah, I would love to do that.
Yeah. So we have another question that came in privately. Jen, do you have that one?
Yep.
Yeah.
It says, John, beautiful work. What direction do you see your sculpture work going in the near future? And how is that trajectory impacted by COVID and or your teaching career?
Great question. Actually, the other thing that I've been doing since COVID has been I've been making furniture. I started making some tables and desks and using live edge wood in particular. So that's been something that I've pursued, particularly because I had a little bit more time with COVID, but not something that will take away from my sculpture. I expect to continue to do that. I'd like to do a larger piece. I haven't done a large piece in a while. So that's one thing that I'd like to challenge myself with sculpturally going forward. Another might be to continue to work on using different types of media, continue to branch out and find out about different material that I can combine with the metal I previously have used and the wood that I use as well.
Amanda, what about your direction? How are you? I think you were talking about how you transitioned more recently to acrylics. What's your direction going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I guess to clarify, I've used acrylic since high school, but I think the work that I did tons of pet portraits for many years, using like a micron pen and watercolors because people love their pets and people loved my portraits. But I felt like the acrylics kind of felt more like my personal expression as opposed to, say, a commission, or something that's just kind of cute. So moving forward, I'm just the color. It's all about color for me, and I like to portray spaces. And I like the element of adventuring to explore and experience the light and the textures of a space, and then putting it solid so I could get it to somebody else. So I hope I get to continue to explore. I haven't done paintings of seascapes, so I'm over in Ocean Grove right now, and I've been doing tons of photography in Asbury Park, and I just did my trip out to Sandy Hook and kind of exploring some different landscapes. I always kind of come back to the Bucks County landscape because that's what I loved my whole life, but I'm looking forward to seeing what different things come of more of a seascape, or maybe even marinas and boats. You see all your famous painters through the ages doing things in different locales. So I hope to explore that a little bit. And kind of the opposite of John, actually. I'm enjoying doing smaller works. So you're thinking about doing a big work. I'm trying to think about doing more but smaller. Because during the pandemic, I bought these little canvases that are like this big and was selling them on my Etsy shop. And it's just really fun and immediate and, maybe a few hours. So there's something nice about that that's really different from the way I've worked before.
So Amanda, I've seen your pet portraits on your website, and they are adorable and marvelous. And people should check those out. Jen posted your website and John's as well, so you can look at their work. It
Cool.
sounds like I'm wrapping up. I'm not quite. We have a little bit more time. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how do you? I think this is an issue for a lot of artists. How do you continue with your own work when you have these teaching students is very demanding work? So how, both time-wise and with energy, so how do you do your own work when you're so committed?
I find the summer's my best time to work, where I can work kind of uninterrupted. I usually go to a woodworking / sculpture conference that's held at Bucks County Community College the early part of June. And it's a 3-day conference where everybody gets together and we collaborate on works. And then there's an auction to sell the work at the end of the conference. And that really gives me a huge shot in the arm to start off my summer, because you're working under the gun. You can't dilly-dally when you're only going to have 3 days to create a piece. And I've been going to that conference for enough years that people know I can weld, and I know people can do a great job with finishing. So people will seek you out sometimes to say, "Can you weld this?" I'll say, "Can you wood burn this?" And realizing what can be done in 3 days is huge, because then I can go into my shop and say, "All right, well, if I can do the pieces that I did or collaborate on the pieces that I did in 3 days and get something finished, then I should be able to produce a decent amount of work over the summer." During the year, it's tough. I teach a lot of seniors, so I've not only been preparing these projects and grading them, but also writing letters of recommendation. So the evenings very often are filled with either doing videos now as tutorials or doing other work. So I really don't find I have a lot of time during the year. Weekends working on the house like I did the last couple of days. So summer's my best time, but I do try and sketch during the year so that when I get into the studio. And then, Amanda, we talked about doing demonstration work the other day. That's something I like to do too, because I can get on the potter's wheel and throw things pretty quickly and feel like I'm accomplishing something that way, and work in my classroom periodically after school hours and make some smaller projects as well. So it's not like I don't create, but the bigger work is done during the summer for sure.
Yeah, and what John was saying is, as we're in the classroom, we have these students looking to us for inspiration. Often I'm making something as the demo, and it might not be my art form, so I'm not always thinking about my own work, but sometimes something happens because of it. I started doing some work with 7th graders with oil pastels, and next thing you know, I was like, oh, maybe I want to use oil pastels. So I do think that working with the students and helping them through projects that we've developed or are part of the school's curriculum help you to get inspired in ways you don't always see coming. But I agree, the summer's obviously the best amount of time to just really like get gung-ho about your art making. I apologize to any of my colleagues who have dealt with me on afternoons on the Friday, because sometimes on Friday afternoon I get into like a little existential crisis where I'm like, okay, how am I going to use this weekend to like be effective as a human, family member, an artist, because I feel like in order to have a successful day, I want to make something. And I know that that's not the only way one can find success, but it certainly is something that is part of like my engine, like I'm like, oh, what can I get going? And a lot of times I lean towards photography because it involves an experience and a capturing, and I can reflect on it. But I do prefer when I have a little more space or mental room where I can do a drawing or a painting or take photos that will then become studies for a series. But yeah, summer is definitely a gift. But I find that if I'm not teaching or doing a summer camp in the summer, sometimes the time gets wobbly, right? So during the school year, we're so busy and structured. John said, I come home and I'm like making Google slide presentations. I'm changing out the pictures. I'm putting in things. I'm finding a good video to share. And that's all exciting, right? As an artist and an art educator, we love that stuff. That's why we do what we do. But in terms of our own personal work, I know I need a little more room. So a 3-day weekend, bring it on.
It sounds like you both really value the time that you have when you get it, and you try to really make it work, which is a good lesson for all of us. Thank you, teachers, for that one. Jen, we have a couple of comments that I'd love for you to share, and then I have one more quick question. We've just got a few minutes left.
Yes, Nancy said all of the student pieces are wonderful. And then Jim Field said, thank you both so much. Art education has always been a huge part of my life from about 11 years old to meeting and being mentored by heroes. I really appreciate your time and have certainly learned. So thank you, teachers.
Thank you, Jim. Yeah.
We appreciate
Very
that.
nice.
Before we wrap it up, we talked about this earlier, and I really wanted to get this point in. Amanda, you'd mentioned it. I think it was an important one, how to give feedback to students who are delicate. And I think that is, we're in a creative field, we all have a little delicacy and tenderness because art and creative endeavors are so personal. So if you both could give a very, very brief, I know the question deserves more, Amanda, but we just have a little bit of time. What advice do you have for giving good feedback, but delicately?
It's, you want to always be honest with the students, but at the same time, not too honest. So sometimes saying something with a little bit of kindness and a little bit of criticism at the same time is helpful, because it's hard, and it's even harder when they're on the screen, right? When you kind of get to feel that body language, sense of presence when you're in the student's room with them, how they feel about the piece or where they're at. But when they just send you an email and you have to respond, it's sort of like, okay, well, I don't want to crush their dreams. So, you gotta encourage for sure, and make sure to try to keep the excitement going, but steer the ship in the right direction. So.
What about you, John? You've obviously had a lot of success with helping students towards a good end product. How do you help them there without crushing their egos?
We have group critiques at the end of every major project, starting from the intro level up through the honors level. And it's a little bit like pulling teeth at the intro level, because I have 9th graders who are sitting next to 12th graders in the same class. But I always start off with the positive. I look for the positive in the project, and I highlight that. I talk about that first, and then I talk about what could be stronger with that project. And I'll often ask the students, if you can turn back time, what would you do differently about this project? So I like to balance things. I like to encourage them to continue doing things that are good, but at the same time, like Amanda said, point out those things that are not as good and need work. And the students give each other feedback too, which is great. So it's not always coming from me. It's coming from somebody who went through the same process and had the same goals and restrictions for the project that they're all working on at the same time. So,
and are they nice to each other? Are they kind, the students?
they generally are. I've had some really pleasant surprises where some kids have been really insightful. And I've just kind of been blown away. I'm like, what she said, what he said, listen well. And then there's some that are not as articulate, that just kind of go through the base terms. Well, I like it. I have to kind of prod them a little bit and find out why they like it. So, but then they learn. By the time they're in my intermediate and honors level, they know that they've got to dig deeper and dig often.
Yeah, it's true. In the group critique setting, allowing them to give feedback to each other is, I think they believe them more than me, even though I'm the teacher. If they're getting like positive encouragement from their classmates, there's a certain amount of like gumption that carries. And I usually just try to really hold my tongue and not talk until all of the students that might speak are done. And then I'll be like, so let's talk about and then I try to jump in, because there's a very fragile like element in the room when, especially my photography classes, where they're talking about all these very personal images. So you know, it's fun though. Critique day is always enjoyable for me. I love seeing their finished product and how they present it. So hopefully I don't hurt anybody's feelings, and that they know I'm trying to be helpful. I always point out also that I am one person with one person's opinion, right? And that in art, you might like this piece or that piece, and I might like this one or that one, and we don't all like the same thing. So I usually have some kind of spiel like that in any critique day, because who knows, maybe I'm not right. You know, like I would like to think that I know the technical elements, but in terms of appreciating art of any kind, there's art for all folks. So.
Fair enough. Thank you both so much for being generous enough to share your Sunday late afternoon with us. And thank you for all you do for the students creating the artists of tomorrow. We appreciate your time. John Rodgers and Amanda Penecale.
Thank you so much for having us. This is lovely.
Yeah, thank you. And I really love the fact that you got two educators as well as artists. I think that's wonderful. I love the folks.
We do too. Thank you, John. Very glad to have you here. Thank you all, everyone, for attending. Thank you for your questions. We'll be back in the new year. Watch our Facebook and Instagram account for details about those. Look into John Rodgers and Amanda Penecale's social media accounts. You can find those via their websites that Jen posted. And thank you, Jen McHugh, very much for producing ArtTalk. You always do a great job.
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome. Oh, we have a little something to leave you with. Amanda also has more talents, so. We
have a little surprise for Amanda and everyone. Yeah. So we're going to let that play you out. I'm Laura Womack. Have a safe and happy holiday season.
Happy holidays, everyone. That's so funny. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Trees to trim.